After years of teaching yoga, there are 6 rules that I have that are my non-negotiables when it comes to teaching. And I believe these are the things that have made me a much better teacher over the years. Some of them I learned from my YTTs, and others I learned through lived experience. And that is why I wanted to share this, because if you are a new teacher, you may not have had these experiences, so I thought it'd be really valuable to share. So if you like, take out a pen and paper, get ready to take some notes. Rule number 1 is to be presentable, not distracting. And I think this is really important, and it doesn't matter what role you're stepping into. You know, the yoga teacher, the manager, the shop assistant, whatever industry you work in, you always want to bring a level of professionalism to be taken seriously. Like, this is so important because, to give you an example, if a businessman turns up in a suit, like he's got his power suit on, he's probably feeling better about himself, and he knows people are probably going to take him more seriously. Whereas if he turns up to a board meeting, for example, in a tracksuit, people are not going to have that same perception of him. They're not going to see him as a trustworthy person who's put together and professional. They're just not. So love it or hate it, this is what's going on in your student's mind when they are seeing you, when they're seeing the way that you are presented. And that's why I think it's really important to bring a level of professionalism to your yoga classes. And I think in the yoga industry, you know, we're very casual. And that's great, there's nothing wrong with that. But I also think it can become too normalized to be too casual. And then it strips the classes of that professionalism that I think is required in any teaching environment. So that is why I think it's really important to consider the way you dress. You know, be put together. And I'm not saying like put in tons and tons of effort, but just be clean. Just make sure that your hair is tidy, that you don't have too much jewelry on. If you do have that jewelry on, so that it's out the way, so that it's not going to interfere if you're giving hands-on assists. Make sure that you don't have overpowering perfume, because if you do, you know, someone might have a negative reaction and you might even not know. They might just not come to your class again, and you'll never get that kind of feedback. So I think it's really important just to mitigate those risks and just keep it like fairly plain and neutral and professional. Then rule number 2 is to dress modestly, to avoid comparison and also to avoid unwanted attention. Because I think in the yoga world, we're so used to wearing like tiny shorts and sports bras, and it's accepted, right? But I think what can happen is, and what I've experienced too, is people then start to look at your body more than you want them to. So I've had many comments over the years where people have made comments on my body, which also, you know, motivated me to dress more modestly, because I didn't want anybody to be comparing themselves. I didn't want to make it about the way my body looked. I just wanted to make it about the classes. So this also links into not getting unwanted attention. You know, it can be male or female or other. Just trying to present yourself in a way so that it's just about the class, it's just about the poses. And I do think, you know, you do need to be wearing form-fitting clothing so that people can see the outline of your body, so that they can see alignment, right? That's impossible for a student to figure out if you're wearing baggy trousers and baggy jumpers, but you can still wear form-fitting clothing and keep it modest. Like if you go back through my YouTube, you will see over 6 years I've gone from wearing like shorts and bras to wearing full-length leggings and mostly like either t-shirts or vests. And I do this because I don't want to make it about my body. I don't want to make it about the way I'm looking at all. I just want people to come and be able to focus on the classes. So that's why I think dressing modestly is key. Then rule number 3 is to weave in teachings in a way that is palatable. So by this I mean, in your YTTs, you know, the workshops that you've been to, anything in the yoga world, you're probably used to a lot of like woo-woo. You're used to some esoteric concepts that the average person hasn't been exposed to. You know, they're probably just not used to those things, and it might either go over their head or it might turn them off completely. And that's why I think it's important to weave in these concepts very subtly so that people can actually relate to them and go, oh, this yoga stuff is actually for me. Like, it's not crazy. Like, I can actually relate to this and bring this into my day-to-day life? And I think one of the easiest ways that you can do that is to bring in concepts to your classes that everybody can relate to, that also link back to, the philosophy and the teachings of yoga. So for example, say you're walking around the class and you see a lot of people straining and forcing themselves to get into a certain pose. One of my favorite things to do is to remind people to detach themselves from the result. Because a lot of people come in with this like competitive nature and attitude where if they don't get this pose, they haven't succeeded, or it hasn't been a proper practice if they didn't do this, right? So whenever I walk around the room and I see that attitude in people, I just remind them, what would happen today if you let go of that expectation? What would happen today if you detached from this idea of doing everything and just stayed present with where you are right now? Like, there's so many different variations of that you can weave into your classes, but this is just one example of how you can make it more than just a movement class, because I think this is really important, especially over the years as the lines get a little bit blurred. Pilates, yoga, gymnastics, there's so many variations now that it becomes difficult for students to understand, what makes this yoga. And that's why I think it's really important, and one of my rules to bring into your classes. Now, another rule for teaching is to not create hierarchy. And I think this is really important, especially because a lot of people, they see things on Instagram, Facebook, wherever, and they go, oh, yoga isn't for me. I can't do those things. And they already feel like they're not good enough because they've seen so much like picture perfect poses, all of these crazy flows, and they go, oh, that's yoga. And that's why I think it's really important to create this environment where all levels, all poses, or body types are on an equal plane. So it's neutral, right? There's no better, there's no worst. There's no this, there's no that. Sure, there might be more challenging poses, less challenging poses, and you can present that in a way that feels non-judgmental. But I think the important thing is not to create hierarchy, because what that does is it takes people out of the experience and it takes them into a place of comparison, where all of a sudden they feel like, oh no, I'm not doing this as well as I thought I was, or oh no, I'm not good as that person because they're doing that. When instead you could just put everything on an equal plane, and then everybody feels like, they're in the right place, they're where they're meant to be. So I hope that if you aren't including that in your classes, that you do, because I've noticed such a big difference since I started teaching in that way. Rule number 5 is to respect time, both yours and theirs. And I think this is really important in classes. If you notice that you're going over time quite frequently, you get a reputation for being that teacher who never finishes on time. And people won't come to your classes if they have busy schedules, or, if they have people depending on them and they need to leave at the time that they're supposed to leave. So really try and get into that habit. But vice versa, this works in your favor too, because if you get a reputation for being the teacher that starts on time and finishes on time, people will respect your time. They won't turn up late. Like, maybe your studio already has this policy where they just close the doors as soon as the class starts and no one can attend after that. I think that's a really great policy, because we should have that in yoga classes. People should respect people's time, and people should take it seriously and not just stroll in like 10 minutes late. Like, maybe you disagree, but from what I've found, when you create that environment of mutual respect, it's beneficial for everybody. My last rule, and this is more like a mindset to bring to your teaching, is to adopt a relationship with failure that's really positive. And this is so key in anything that you do, because you might teach a class and it might go horribly wrong. You might give an assist and it just, it's not quite right. You might say something and it just comes out like word vomit. There's so many variations of this in teaching. But if you withdraw from that experience and you go, oh no, I'm never going to do that again, you'll never be able to progress. You'll never learn. Like, if I go back and I look at the way I used to teach 6 years ago, I cringe. But I learned so much, because each time something wasn't quite right, I went away I made a note, I tried to, build on that and then implement those changes for the next class and the next class and the next class. And this doesn't happen overnight. Like, this takes years and years and years of refining, but this is how you get to a place where you teach classes where your students feel, wow, that class was really intelligent. It was so intentionally cued. It flowed in such a way that was so intuitive and clearly like very considerate of people's bodies. Like, you don't get to that place straight out of your first YTT. And that is why you have to adopt a really positive relationship with failure. I hope all of these rules, you can take them as rules or see them more as tips if you like, have helped. And if you'd like more tips like this, then please join our newsletter. I've been pouring so much energy into it because I feel like there is a real lack of this kind of knowledge being shared online outside of like YTTs where, it's behind a paywall. So if you are looking for that kind of advice, then sign up for the newsletter. The link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.